OpTic and Loud are the biggest rivals in Valorant, and this week's Champions Grand Finals just proved it. Valorant is still such a young game, which means that any conversation about best teams or legacies has been reasonably shut down with the argument that simply not enough time has passed for there to even be an answer. But after Champions 2022, it is indisputable which two teams have the biggest and best rivalry in this esport, and that is Brazil's Loud and North America's OpTic Gaming. We already knew that OpTic were good last year, back when they were Envy and they forced their way into the grand finals of Masters Berlin. They just picked up this promising new player in Ye and hoping he could be the difference maker for this team's success. Ye was already being talked about as a potential best player in the world before OpTic ever even faced Loud. But still, there weren't exactly any rivalries. Envy playing Gambit in Berlin is a game which was never repeated. The Sentinels Fnatic Grand Final of the previous Masters event never came again, and the 2021 Champions winners Ascend fell off the face of the map after their victory. Coming into 2022, it was anyone's game. North America had dominated early Valorant, with Europe pulling back in the later half of 2021. No one knew which region would lead and which teams would subjugate the others coming into this new season. The real story of Valorant was still waiting to be written. When OpTic first came up against Loud in the upper bracket finals at Masters Reykjavik, no one had any reason to believe that this would one day become the most invigorating rivalry to permeate through 2022's Valorant season. Coming into the event, those who were well acquainted with the Brazilian scene made it very clear that Loud were not to be underestimated. The squad had only been put together at the beginning of the year, and yet they'd managed to eat through their adversaries, topping it all off with a 3-0 victory over NIP to secure their victory at the end of Stage 1. Names like Sasi and Sardhak were already known internationally for their performance on Vikings, but soon enough the others were going to become ubiquitous throughout the international scene as well. So people already knew this was a good team. They'd already knocked EU giants Team Liquid and G2 down into the lower bracket, but now they were coming for the NA favorites. 13-2 victory to OpTic on their map of Fracture, and this looked like it was going to be a blowout. Brazil may be good, but okay. 13-8 to Loud on Ascent. That's fine. I mean, I guess that makes sense because it was their map pick. So then to Icebox, and it starts off about as you would expect. OpTic get their buy round, and then back to Loud, and to Loud, and to Loud. It gets to 12-8 before OpTic start clawing their way back into this game. And right as they have the chance to throw it into overtime, Loud snatched the victory away from them. OpTic are going to the lower bracket. Now, Reykjavik was really the event of subverted expectations, particularly as far as regions go. Usually early in the life cycle of an esport, it's pretty normal to expect EU or NA to be the heavy hitter, maybe Korea, depending on which esport you're in. But in this event, OpTic were the only team from EU or NA who were even left at this point in the competition. There was such a building hype for the minor regions here. Humility may have to be forced upon North America at the very last hurdle. And with OpTic breezing through the lower bracket finals, it was a rematch with Loud. And this was a grudge match. So suddenly the meeting of these two teams just felt all that more extra bit personal. OpTic had an unproven track record in terms of rematches up until this point. Masters Berlin had been single elimination, and they hadn't faced a team they'd previously lost to in Challengers playoffs. Loud, however, had shown in Challengers that if they beat a team in the upper bracket finals, they could damn well do it again in the grand finals. And Loud had both of the map bans as well as the first pick. So out went their perma of Split, out went OpTic's stomping ground of Fracture, and in came Loud's comfort pick of Ascent. There was so much riding on this match. Proof that OpTic could overcome their setback, proof that Brazil were unignorable on a global scale, proof that North America weren't only good for the fleeting success that Sentinels had brought them, proof of these teams' abilities to create contingency and adaptation, proof that their ideas were strong enough, proof that whatever had happened in the upper bracket finals, they were the better team. And it was one hell of a grand finals. OpTic flipped Loud's Ascent performance into their own 13-9 victory. They crumbled Loud's bind attack and fought back against their defense into an overtime win. And finally, after a back and forth and a long round streak from Loud, OpTic forced Breeze into overtime and walked away as the Masters Reykjavik champions. 3-0. They pulled through to show Loud irrevocably who was the best team in the world. Just days ago, Loud had just been some team from Brazil that OpTic may have to face at some point. And OpTic, just another North American team that Loud may have to defeat just to show their region's worth. But now, there was blood in this fight. And this between Loud and OpTic, this wasn't over. But when I say it wasn't over, I didn't quite mean that I expected the next time that Loud and OpTic would meet each other would be in a group stage elimination match at the next Masters event. I mean, what? We knew that VALORANT was unpredictable and inconsistent with its victors, but for the two grand finalists of the last Masters event to be scrapping over the final playoff spot in Copenhagen? What was going on here? OpTic versus Loud was maybe the most anticipated game of Masters Copenhagen. That shouldn't be surprising. The precedent that had been set in Reykjavik was a strong one. Both of these teams had something to prove. And every time Loud had held OpTic's head under the water, they'd always come up to breathe right when it mattered. So of course, everyone wanted to see Loud come back stronger and show how many steps ahead they could be. But not like this! 487,671 people tuned in for that match. It was the 4th highest watched game of the entire tournament. And it was in the fucking group stage! People were mortified that they had to lose one of these teams so early in the tournament, that previously they'd been battling for victory and now it was just for survival. It made this match feel so much more weighted, like this evolving antagonism meant so much more. Because now, one of them had to end the other's hopes in order to guarantee their own future. And of course, it was never going to be easy. A 13-8 victory for Loud on Ascent was immediately followed up by a 13-8 victory for OpTic on Fracture. Both of these teams defaulting to the compositions that gave them their initial reputations on their map picks, their most characteristic ways of playing, and it had put them in a deadlock. So of course, map 3 had to go to overtime. Oh my god, you can't write this shit. Eventually, Split ran its course, and the pattern that had been established that OpTic would always pull through in overtime prevailed. Loud were going home. They didn't even get to touch the playoffs. The team who had ripped a Masters victory away from them was now stopping them from even having a chance. So okay, this is getting serious now. There had to be such a resentment brewing in Loud. They had been so close and OpTic had taken it away from them twice. The only event left of the year was Champions. And hey, wouldn't you know, OpTic and Loud were gonna be group buddies. They were gonna be all snuggled up together there in Group B. So we knew something was going to happen. Well, it didn't take long for that day to come. After each winning their group stage games, they had to face each other to see who was going to be the higher seed. So this was a little less intense. Both teams were going to make it to the playoffs anyway. But by this point, people were vying to see how the story of Loud and OpTic was going to unfold. The overtimes we'd come to know from these two teams wasn't present for this one. Instead, we saw a lot more swinging in the strengths. Loud taking 11 of their 12 attack rounds on Breeze, a map where they'd taken inspiration from the past and brought back Cypher, while OpTic still lent onto their chamber play. OpTic continued their traditional neon composition for Fracture and took their own victory there. Pearl was the unknown territory. This was the first event we were even seeing with the map as part of the game, and neither team had played it so far. But this wasn't even competitive. There was none of that characteristic push and pull, the not knowing until the last second. OpTic had it, 13-3. Not a single player on Loud went positive. It was just a mess. And this was strange because on the one hand, this wasn't an elimination game, so the teams could sort of use this as a scouting tool. But on the other, OpTic and Loud had now faced each other 4 times, and Loud hadn't been able to best OpTic since that very first victory against them. So were they just always set to be their kryptonite? It was a while before they saw each other again too. Both wove their way through the upper bracket, getting closer and closer until, just like in Reykjavik, they met in the upper bracket finals. Now this was not just a grudge match. It wasn't just about qualifying for grand finals. But this was an exact mirror image of their very first encounter. From many, many months ago, OpTic and Loud were now back here. Same rosters, same place in the bracket, same desire to be the best team in VALORANT. Fans were pretty normal. OpTic were on the Icebox hate train, and Loud had just been clobbered in Pearl by OpTic. Picks were normal too. OpTic were maybe the best team on Bind, and Loud simply were that Ascent team. Remove 2 maps that the opponent liked, and you're left with Breeze. Cool. Well, this ended up being the first and only series that Loud and OpTic ever played that it didn't go to at least 3 maps. And it absolutely did not go to OpTic. Loud were back on the board, baby, and they had a point to prove. Sure, maybe it had been a little while since they'd come out on top, but that streak was no more. OpTic walked away with whispers of FNS's performance surrounding them like a suffocating smoke. Everyone was saying the same thing, you couldn't get away from it. What the hell happened to that team out there? Loud were going to the grand finals, granted a second chance at lifting a trophy after having it wrenched away in Reykjavik. And OpTic were guaranteed nothing. They were going to have to fight through the lower bracket demons of DRX to even hope to get to that point again. But, as we all know, that chance came. And I think this is where it really dawned on us that that rivalry between Loud and OpTic was real. In 2022, the first international grand finals was Loud and OpTic. And in 2022, the very final international grand finals to crown the champion of Valorant for this year was Loud and OpTic. Loud had gone through beatdown after beatdown this year, with OpTic seemingly able to regenerate after every overtime entered, every grudge match accepted. But fuck what happened in Reykjavik. So once again, Loud get the ban advantage. In fact, in all but one of the series these teams have played together, they've had that advantage. But in a grand finals, it's extra poignant. By Pearl, by Fracture, these maps that OpTic have proven such dominance on were gone. Ascent and Breeze for Loud, Bind and Haven for OpTic, Icebox charitably left for map 5. I think most people would have looked at this and seen an advantage for Loud. But OpTic looked at it and saw a challenge. And that was 100% something they gave to the Brazilians. Back to those OG Ascent compositions, but this time the overtime game was starting from the word go. OpTic's slew of rounds at the start of the game, helped by Loud's lack of diligence in checking corners, and OpTic's audaciousness in overstepping their domain, was roped back in by Loud's tenacity, their disquiet for OpTic's disrespect, and their insistence on trading valuable kills. But the plays by OpTic just looked like it was heading for them. Yay, with a 3k Heaven flank and Crashies about to cancel the defuse. Until that happened. Oh, fuck. Okay. This game was going to be something else. Come to Bind, and what is even happening? OpTic were bringing in the same disrespect they had paraded in map 1, but Loud simply had no answer for it. Players like Marv pulling out crazy plays in just the first round, and OpTic gathering more and more credits to supply themselves for as many rounds as they needed. And sure, maybe someone like Aspas can come in and clutch a round or two, but Loud needed far more than that to win this map. 1-1, onto Breeze. This is where the map pool starts to fall very much into Loud's favor. But after such a bitter loss on Bind, who even knew where their heads were at and how much power and momentum OpTic would be able to bring into the rest of the series? Back to the Jets, Aspas versus Victor, with Ye remaining on Chamber and Les sticking to Cypher. The attacking operator in Aspas' hand taking kills and collats, and the stark recognition you had to give Les as a major playmaker. The back and forth of the second half made it seem impossible to sense who would even take the map. It seemed to creep closer and closer to an OpTic victory, and then with virtually no resources at their disposal, Aspas and Les forced the game into overtime. And eventually, they forced the game into victory. Just one more map needed, and Loud can call themselves the world champions. They can take the losses they've suffered to OpTic since the Reykjavik upper bracket finals, and they can vindicate themselves as the conquerors of their rival and the conquerors of Valorant. Haven started off risky from the moment the agent select was secured. OpTic choosing to bring back the Phoenix, and Loud relying on a Raze-Reyna combo as their duelists of choice. Compared to the disrespectful, overconfident level of play that OpTic paraded all the way back in map 1, the tides had completely turned. OpTic looked less sure of themselves, while Loud looked unperturbed. The post plants that OpTic could usually smash on this map felt like a struggle every time, while Les and Pancada continued to force their opponents' KDs into the negative. No round 3 on either half for OpTic, and it felt like this was slipping through their fingers. An ace from Les as the Brazilian momentum kept building, and in just a couple of rounds, the championship. After 6 matchups on the international stage, 2 grand finals, 6 overtime maps, 3 OpTic wins and now 3 Loud wins, Loud finally overcame OpTic at the time where it mattered the most and made themselves the 2nd ever world champions of Valorant. From 2 teams who just so happened to do well in Reykjavik, these 2 have become the most prolific rivalry in all of Valorant. A peak viewership of over 1.5 million people tuned in to watch the matchup that they knew carried so much weight and so much story. And the best part of it is, assuming that these 2 rosters stay together, they're going to be playing in the same league next year. And we're gonna just see this story continue on and on and on. We're at that exciting part of the life of Valorant now where it's been going on long enough that we can start to put together these stories, see where the rivalries are, see who are the best teams. And Loud and OpTic have made this first one such an incredible one to follow. And assuming that these rosters do stay together in the 2023 season, I am so excited to see where this continues on. But for now, I hope you guys really enjoyed. Let me know down below what your favorite game between Loud and OpTic has been and what your favorite part of following this rivalry is. And were you happy with the result of Champions, or did you want OpTic to win? I'm intrigued. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all of that stuff, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.